Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. For this tutorial you're going to need 4 pieces of 18 gauge round wire about 9.5 inches long, a spool of 28 gauge round, a cabochon about 35 by 25 millimeter, and a smaller cabochon about 4 by 6 millimeter. And your hand tools. Mine are from Swanstrom. I purchased from Rio Grande. First things first, we're going to take those 4 pieces of 28 gauge round and line them up. Figure out about exactly how wide we want our binding band to be at the bottom and where we need our start point to be for that. And then we're going to grab just our first piece of wire, and I wrap 3 times around just to get that wire nice and secure. And then we're going to start adding wires. So wire 2 is going on now. We'll go once over 1 and 2. Pull up between 1 and 2, and we're going to add wire 3. Go once over 2 and 3, and bring the wire out between 2 and 3. And then we're going to add wire 4. Go once over 3 and 4 together. Come out between 3 and 4, and go once over 4 by itself. Once we've gone over 4 by itself, we're going to straighten these wires up a little bit. We really want this to be vertical across the wires. And then we're going to go back down 2 at a time again. Once over 3 and 4 together. Once over 2 and 3. And then once over 1 and 2. 1 by itself. And then we'll push them together a little bit. Take this tail off of that 28 gauge round, get it out of the way. And then go back up 2 at a time. 1 and 2 together. 2 and 3 together. 3 and 4. And 4 by itself. And this weave will just be that pattern back and forth. 3 and 4. 2 and 3, 1 and 2, and 1 by itself. Taking the time to cinch and pinch and tighten your weave as you go will make sure that you have a nice, even, straight weave. Ideally, that's what we're looking for. That's the most aesthetic and the most stable work. So again, starting from the bottom, working our way up, we'll go once over 1 and 2, once over 2 and 3, once over 3 and 4, and once over 4 by itself. A little tighten here. Once over 3 and 4, once over 2 and 3, once over 1 and 2, and once over 1 by itself. I hope you enjoy the tutorials and the other shorts and things here on the channel. If you do, I'd encourage you to go to the website linked in my bio, join the email list, and be notified every time I upload a new tutorial. I'm going to try to be more regular about uploading these on Tuesdays. I do appreciate all the support you all have shown on my previous tutorials and shorts. You're such an incredible community. Thank you for that. I figured we would do this tutorial in nothing but round wire because I know some of our friends that aren't here in the US. Oh, here's a good look at what this pattern should look like as you go. Our friends that aren't here in the US sometimes have a difficult time finding half round wire or square wire, so I wanted to make a video that was accessible to our friends in some of those places. If you happen to be in one of the areas where you can't get or struggle to source half round or square wire, let me know in the comments. This one was for you specifically. We love to do these pinches, these cinches. Make sure that we're tightening up this weave so that we have a very uniform look. Even though this weave isn't super visible when worn, it's a fundamental part of the piece. It's super important. This binding keeps our setting all together. All cold connection jewelry is tension settings. So we have to create tension between the wires to hold our stones into place. We don't have the fortune of using heat or soldering to create mountings or settings. So we have to use tension, and making sure that we maintain proper tension in our weave helps us provide a uniform weave, and like I said, a more structured and a more satisfying, a more aesthetically pleasing, and a stronger product. Up again, 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 by itself, 3 and 4, 2 and 3, 1 and 2, and 1 by itself. Because I've chosen to set this stone horizontally, which is just how this lab flashes best, with light above it and tilted ever so slightly like it would be sitting on a chest, this particular labradorite gives the best color laying horizontally. And because of that, our binding across the bottom needs to be a little wider than if we were to set it vertically, so that when we bend our wires inward to make our setting for the stone, they don't cover the stone too much. So we are making a nice wide band of binding here before we set the stone. Sometimes you'll find your wires want to crisscross. So here I am working to separate those 2 and 3 wires to make sure that I don't twist them inside the weave. And you'll see for the rest of the way through this weave, I have to be very mindful about wires 2 and 3 because they tend to pull together as I'm going up. And that's where I'm trying to make my tension a little too tight. You don't need to pull your wire so tight that it's twisting or bending your wires together. You want to make sure that you're just maintaining this nice, level, flat surface. So I had to be careful the rest of the way through this weave to make sure that I wasn't pulling too hard as I'm going upward and pulling wires 2 and 3 together to the point that they're wanting to flip and trade places. I am trying to make a nice tight weave here, but there at 2 and 3, sometimes I was pulling so tight that it was making them want to crisscross. That just happens sometimes. Even 6, almost 7 years in now, I struggle sometimes to make sure that my tension is right on. And that's with any handmade anything. I think that's part of the point, is that it's not machined and that it's not necessarily perfect. But we've got a nice, even weave here. So we've tied off, twisted off that extra little tail of wire. There's what the inside of the weave looks like, and the outside, 2 different patterns. You could use the other side of the weave if you want. I just find the top, the every other, more aesthetically pleasing. Cut this little tail here, and there we have it. Now it's time to set our lab, or whatever stone you're going to use. Again, this was about 35 wide by 25 tall in the horizontal position. And I'm going to get that weave in the middle of that stone approximately and start bending these wires upward to form a bail. Now my wires are a little wider than my stone, which is desirable, but it does make following the shape of the stone a little difficult, so I get that bend where I want it, and then I'm going to use my hands to help form it a little better, a little more evenly across all 4 wires. And when you get to the point that your wires are crossed like this at the top, I like to take them and separate them and interlock them like holding hands. That way none of the wires twist or get in the wrong position, and you're able to make a nice even shape. If you don't interweave or interlock the wires, you'll end up with one side being more forward of the other, and a stone that doesn't necessarily lay straight, even once you've kind of straightened them out. So I try to make sure that I interlock those wires so that we get a nice even shape here. And then once I'm satisfied with the placement of the stone, how those wires bend over it toward one another, and I'm sorry to be just a little off camera here. We want to get that bail lined up with the center of our weave there in the middle, and then we're going to pinch those together. And you'll see I struggled to get it centered with the middle of the binding wires at the bottom on this one. That bend was just a little too far up. So we're going to take the time to be meticulous about that. If your first bend doesn't feel quite right, you always have the ability to go in, and until you start tying things together, you can make corrections. So we'll get it where it feels just right. And in the beginning, I would think, oh, I'll fix this later. I'll find a way to cover it or change it or deal with it later. And I was in such a hurry to just keep moving on that I often made myself disasters that I couldn't hide. I kept working and would end up with an uneven product, or a pendant that didn't lay straight or hang straight. It's worthwhile to take the time to make those little corrections. So we're back to the 28 gauge round now. We've found a satisfactory bend even right above the middle of that binding weave, and we're going to wrap our 28 gauge round around all 8 of these wires 5 times. And you'll see here I'm taking the time to make sure that the wires lay evenly together. It's particularly difficult with round wire to get them not to want to lay in one another's nooks and crannies. To get the 2 wires or the 8 wires to sit straight together is a little tricky. But again, a worthwhile effort to put in at this phase, because if you don't, you'll end up with a product that's a little wonky. I'm size testing, making sure that I haven't bent the frame out of shape by bending the back 2 wires from each side down and the front wire from each side forward, leaving the second pair of wires open. We're going to shape those now to make our bail. Now I have made enough of this bail at this point that I'll shape this just with my hands. In the beginning, I would use often a Bic lighter to help me make this shape. Any number of cylindrical things could also be useful, a marker or a pen, or even bail making pliers, although it's not the source that they're, or the job that they're meant for, a mandrel, anything to help you make this kind of teardrop shape, make the little bulb of the teardrop even toward the bottom. Now here we're going to take our weaving wire up through the middle of the back 2 and around that first wire 3 times. You're going toward the middle. Once you've gone around 3 times, you'll go under and across to the other side and bring that wire up and around toward the middle 3 times on wire number 2. And then you come back across again, and 1, 2, 3 on that 3rd time, under and across to wire 2. And this is called a figure 8 weave, and it's just this back and forth. 1, 2, 3. You can also use 2 or even just 1 gap loops there. If you don't have at least 1 gap loop though, you will have more wire in the middle of your weave than you have on the outsides, and what presents is kind of an uneven product. The wires that touch the base wires will be able to move and not be nice and secure. So you need at least 1 gap weave. My preference is the 2 gap weaves and then to cross. You want to make a stable enough netting to be a support for your smaller cabochon. Otherwise, you could do 4 or 5 weaves in between and have a wider, more airy weave. But because I often use this weave, like I said, as a back support for a cabochon, this 1, 2, and then across seems to be, for me, the most secure and stable for the whole job of being both the bail and the backdrop for the stone. So again, the weave is just 1, 2, and 3 times around each base wire in toward the middle. And then you go under and across to the other side to allow you to do those 3, 1, 2, and 3 again. And then under and across to the other side. 1, 2, 3. And like with any weave, ideally we'll tighten as we go so that we have a very stable, secure, and aesthetically pleasing product at the end. Maintaining your tension in this weave is really important. If you try to pull too tight, you'll end up pulling your base wires together and changing the shape of the weave. So you're just laying these wires onto the base wire. You know, you're not pulling to make it tighter. You're just laying them around the base wires and then taking them across, holding them in place with that back hand. You'll see my pointer finger on my left hand is doing the job of holding those wires in place as I add more wire with my right hand. And it enables me to keep that weave more secure and tighter without having to make the binding around each of those wires so tight that it can't breathe, that it's pulling the weave together. I hope that makes sense. And I tend to weave off the spool. It helps me to keep the wire straight and organized. I cannot give you a measurement for how long this weaving wire will need to be, and I do apologize for that. I have attempted to remove wire from the spool and weave with it, and I find that the wire gets caught in things and gets work hardened and becomes more difficult to work with. So this is just my preference. If you have a secret for how to work the wire not off of the spool but keep it organized, I would love to hear that secret. Please drop it in the comments and educate not only me but everyone else who goes to read those comments. Again, doing our best to keep this nice and tight. We'll push down every now and then with either our fingernails or a pair of our pliers to tighten that weave up and make sure that all of those wires that are on the base wires, all those little weaves around it, stay nice and close together and don't expose the base wire. We want this weave to be nice and secure on those base wires so that when we bend it over, we don't create space between those weaves, and it continues to look nice and tight, secure, even. All of those things really are kind of synonymous in both weaving and wire weaving. I imagine crochet too, your tension will matter as to maintaining an even product. It is a tricky one to figure out. I definitely pulled my base wires together in the beginning a lot, trying to do this weave, because I wanted to pull the wires hard to make them tight and make them secure, and I'm finding that just getting them wrapped around, you know, evenly and securely, but not, you know, pulling so hard that I historically have broken my 28 gauge in the past. It's easily done. And it does get a little trickier as you come to the narrowing of the wire. It does want to slip up more, especially with sterling. Sterling is so springy. I definitely recommend learning with dead soft copper wire. It's much less expensive and much easier to work. It tends to want to stay where you put it. I would not recommend brass. It's even more springy than sterling. It's great to make your hands very, very strong. It will do that. But it's very difficult learning material. Aluminum is too soft and won't maintain the shape that you use with it, and stainless is almost as hard as brass. I highly, highly, highly recommend copper, because even in the same temper, the metals display different hardnesses. And copper's definitely just right as far as being able to hold a shape. That's why so many jewelers use it, especially wire artists. Now, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I should also mention while we're here that I do have a Wire Wrap 101 course available on my website, linked in my bio. It's just $20 for 9 full tutorials, including a all about wire video and an all about tools video, 6 full-length regular speed tutorials just like this. Nothing's sped up, nothing's cut out. It's just one straight cut so that you can see the whole process. And then finally an oxidation and polishing tutorial. So the whole process from beginning to finish is available in that course. And again, just $20 on the website. If you go make the purchase within about 24 hours, you should get an email from me sending you a link and a password to get access to those videos. And they're there and replayable forever. If this video hasn't convinced you, though, I hope you'll go check out my other tutorials. I will continue to post free tutorials here on this Boisa Spain YouTube channel for as long as I'm able to create, hopefully for years to come. Almost to the end here. We're going to do our last few rounds of 1, 2, 3 back and forth. And when we get up to the top there, we're going to bind both of those wires 5 times around, just like we did at the beginning. I want to thank you all again for coming, checking out the videos, and participating on the channel. I hope you'll leave a comment letting me know how you feel about it, how you feel like I can make these videos better. Always seeking to improve not only my wire work, but my content. And I'm relatively new to these long form videos, so I'm definitely wide open to your suggestions. I'm thankful very much to my crew on TikTok. My extensive experience in live streaming there has done a great job training me for what information, will be useful and helpful in these tutorials. And so shout out to the TikTok community, and maybe if you haven't joined us there, you will. I'm there under the same username and live stream pretty regularly, doing the same thing, just making things and chit-chatting. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then we'll bring that binding wire up between the middle. And I like to twist to break them. It gets closer than taking my snips to it, almost always. All right, now we're going to push this down and make a little bend in those 2 wires, and we're going to bend it toward the back. And then we're going to take those 2 wires through the bottom and over all 4 wires and tuck them in the back. And that forms our bail. If you don't feel comfortable bending the wire over your finger to make your bail, you can use bail making pliers, or again, a pen or a marker, anything cylindrical to help you make that shape. I'm only comfortable doing it over my finger because I've done this so many times. But whatever cylindrical thing you can find, even probably the handles of your tools could work. So we bend those over, tuck them into the middle of the piece there where those wire ends aren't going to snag or scratch on anybody's clothing or skin. We want to make jewelry that's comfortable to wear, so always the wire ends are going to be on the insides of the piece. Yay! Alright, so here we have our frame completely built, or our cage completely built. We're going to add our little accent cabochon now. I twisted those front 2 wires twice, and then I seat this stone and form them around it. Once I get these nice and tight, and you want to take them up, you know, to where the stone is just a little narrower. You don't want them as wide as it is at the bottom, or the stone will pop out. So we pull them up where they're over about the middle of the stone, and we start twisting again in the same direction that we twisted before we seated it. Get it nice and tight on there. Make sure that the stone is going to be held in place. I'm going to use 1 set of pliers on the top and 1 set of pliers on the bottom, right side, left side, and pinch down. Make sure that the stone is going to be secure and not pop out. That also gives us the opportunity to straighten this twist art, finish it out. Here we go. And we'll secure it just like we did the bail, under the cage, through the middle, out the front, over those all 4 wires again, and then tucked to the inside. Just like everything that we've done so far, it's worth taking time here to make sure that your connections are nice and tight, that the tension is good. Our whole foundation for this piece depends on all of these connections being nice and tight and secure. The comfort and wearability of the piece also depends on making sure that our connections are solid, stable, and tucked away so that there's nothing scratchy left out to damage clothing or scratch skin. Oh goody, it's time to set our big stone. So here we're just gonna push our stone into place, make sure that our cage is wide enough for it, and then we'll take flat nose pliers and twist just the back wire in toward the middle. Grab it flat and turn it in toward the middle. That is the foundation. That's going to hold your stone in. That's your back plate. And we'll want to make sure that we get our bail nice and straight and centered up from that. And then we're going to pull our front 2 wires forward in toward the middle. I don't go quite as far with these because I don't want to cover the stone. So we're just turning them in far enough to make it secure. And then again, the second wire is going to be like an echo or a ripple of that first bend in to hold the stone secure. I'm so sorry that I'm a little out of frame here, but doing the same thing on the left side. Just turning that wire inward just a little, and then we're pinching down. Testing the strength and security, making sure that that stone's going to stay in place. My third wire here wants to be a little flippy off the back of this stone, so I'm pulling in again on 1 and 2, pulling 3 out and over, and making sure that everything is centered and even. Using the side of my pliers to push the binding flat up against the stone, and my flat nose pliers to tighten everything up and make sure everything's nice and secure before we move on to making the decorative finishing touches. Your pliers are useful not just for pinching, but also for pushing. I hope you notice that you can use the flat side of your pliers to push your wire. All right, we're using the front wire from the right side and twisting around over the center of the bail. I'm going to use my pliers here to tighten up that twist a little bit, make that coil just a little smaller and tighter. And then we're going to pull that tail up and take it over all 4 of the wires on the back side. Snip and tuck. And now we're going to do some coiling. All of this by hand. It is common and something that I do to make coils with a drill, but when you're working with wire that's already on the piece, that's not possible. So we do a process called hand drilling or finger drilling, where we anchor that 28 gauge. I put it through the bail and then anchored it, and then take a few wraps around and get it started, and then pinch just like this and twist the piece with our hands to coil that 28 gauge around that 18 gauge base wire. And this isn't a necessary step if you feel like the texture is too much or takes away from the piece in any way. You don't have to do this. I love texture in my jewelry, so if I can add a coil or a weave or a twist, I often will. And because we were focusing on techniques we could do with just round wire, I thought this would be a fun one to add in. So again here, we're just spinning the piece, coiling that wire around every now and then, just like the weave, stopping and pushing it together, making sure that it's nice and even and tense. If you ever feel like you've got a gap that you can't fix, you can unwind a little bit and then push. And when you feel like you've got enough, you'll take that coil and, just like with the bends, make kind of a ripple or an echo of the last curl you made. You'll just take it over. We want it to have a similar shape, you know. Twist off that tail again from your 28 gauge. Tuck your 18. Snip and cinch. Everything's hidden away nice and secure. And all these little pinches reinforce the security of your piece. You know, the binding on those 4 wires. And now we're going to add more coiling, but we're also going to add 2 curls here. So I'm just going to bend that front wire from the left side as like an echo to our previous, or a ripple of our previous curls, and let it meet the side. And then I'm going to take the second one and I'm going to start a coil on it. We're not going to secure, snip, cut anything with that first one yet. Now we'll start our second decorative coil, and we'll do the same process. Anchor the wire through the bail, hold it with another, the left hand. Make our first few wraps, cinch them down in there, and once we've got enough room to get our fingers in to pinch on that 28 gauge, we'll start the drilling. Hold with the right hand, spin with the left hand, or I should say dominant and non-dominant, shouldn't I? I'm holding with my right hand and spinning with my left. And we're going to try to get a length that's going to get us across the front of the piece. And then we're going to have to cut our 28 gauge. Because we're going to use that wire to secure both of our little loopy wires to our cage. So just where they can meet those cage wires there at the side. I hope you guys are prepared to giggle a little with me here, because this tends to be a little tricky. I was displeased with the shape of the wire at the top, so I used my round nose pliers to make it a little rounder. I had kind of bent it at an angle. So here we've got to get our 28 gauge under just the front wire on the cage to attach our two decorative wires. And this first one, I do okay getting it under and wrapped around. But I struggle a little bit here, trying to figure out the best place to get it underneath and back up toward to hold it in. So if you struggle with this too, please understand. I have been handling wire almost every day for 6.5 years, and even now still struggle with silly things like getting these loops made. But we're going to do this a total of 3 times, and again we're going over the 2 decorative wires and just the front wire of the cage. So we're holding 3 wires together. But that's what will bind. Oh look, here we got it to go out the back. And then I have to take it through the front to finish this. Anyhow, this is what's going to bind those decorative wires to the cage and hold them in place. It's really important. We could make these loops without binding them to the cage, but then a hair or a ribbon or anything could come up under those curls and pull them up and ruin the wearability of the piece. So once we've got those 3 binding loops around all 3 wires, we're going to finish the coil on this wire. Just enough to make a pretty curl at the end. Make sure to push it tight, make it even and uniform like it has been. And when you decide you've got your coil long enough to make a curl the size you like, you'll snip that 28 gauge. And when you make your cut on your base wire, you need to leave just a little bit of room, because when you go to curl it up, that coil is going to expand a little bit. And it'll push right off the end if you don't give yourself just a little bit of extra room. So here I'm going to snip with just a little bit of space, and then I'm going to grab with my round nose pliers, get turned in toward the middle, and make a cute little curl here. Bleep. I like to use my flat nose to tighten that curl up and cinch it flat onto the piece. From there, you're going to take that first wire that you turned in and make a curl in the other direction. And again, we have to attach it to that front wire on the cage. Don't forget to twist your tails off. So here I have a little wrestling match with getting this started. And like I said, I don't cut these. I don't cut anything out. I don't fast forward anything because I want you to see. It happens to everybody that there's a little bit of a struggle. Eventually, maybe, I'll get so good at this that it won't ever happen. But in the meantime, the real and true is that I wasted this wire. I worked it past its point of flexibility and said, you know what? I think I'm going to have to start over. Alright, so here we finally get a start that's worthwhile. And we just went under both of these two wires and we're going to loop around them again 3 times. And once you've got those 3 secured, twist them off, make sure that you get them nice and close. Nothing sticks out to catch on anything or be uncomfy later. And then snip the end to leave yourself enough room for a curl. Grab with your round nose pliers and make your cutie curl. This is your finishing touch. Again, tightening with those flat nose pliers, pinching it down, getting it flat onto the cabochon. Ta-da! I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you'll come back and see us again. Have a wonderful day, my friends.